Okay, folks, we're going to go ahead and get started now. I want to welcome you to the discussion of DSD and the artist perspective here. The thing that we're doing this year that's different than what we've done in past years is we're going to be spending a lot more time talking about the creative and artistic dimensions of the recording arts and how DSD has opened some new doors for the emotional connection or reconnection with the music. And we didn't want to simply have a seminar in which we once again rehearse all of the technical issues, questions, articles, software, hardware, because that's actually pretty well done right now. You may have noticed, if you've been following, that really there's not a whole lot of question as to whether or not DSD should be part of the audio arts. It's now a question of what the heck do we do with it? How do we advance it? What are its strengths? What are its challenges? And that seems to be pretty well in command right now. Interesting things are happening. But we're going to be spending time today taking a look at that creative dimension. And so I wanted something that was really different, and we've assembled a panel here that I think is going to be an excellent group of people to talk to that creative dimension. I'll introduce myself. I'm Dr. David Robinson. I'm editor-in-chief of Positive Feedback. We've been publishing for 26 years now and have taken a strong interest in DSD and SACD from the very beginning, way back in the fall of 1998, when I first traveled down to Mobile Fidelity and got my first taste of what DSD would do. And that so gobsmacked me that I don't think I've ever recovered. And some people say, well, that's just as well. But the idea that we could begin to really start making significant advances towards mic feeds and master tapes was, for me, a huge breakthrough. It wasn't minor, it was major. It's not like everything else goes away, but something new has been added. And the something new is important. And the people we've assembled for you today are people who are up to their elbows dealing with it all the time. Not just to hear from me, it's much more important that you hear from them, because they're the ones who are in the trenches and they know. So what I'm going to do, without any further ado, is I'm going to start with Gus. Gus can introduce himself and then introduce his guest artist who will talk to you, and then we'll just work right on down the line, okay? Gus?
Hello. My name's Gus Skinas. I run the Super Audio Center out of here in Colorado, in Longmont, Colorado. Sure. So I run the Super Audio Center in Colorado, and my background with DSD is I got involved with Sony early on when the SACD was just being launched. There were really no tools to make recordings that could show off what DSD could do. So early on, we started making some of the first recording equipment and tools to produce SACDs. And my guest here, Janet Fetter, is also local from Denver, and she's done numerous super audio CDs from, well, how many? Three? Two. Okay, well, two. And maybe she can tell you a little bit about her history and
Thanks. Thank you, Gus.
Sure.
It was such a privilege to land in the sonic universe where I met Gus and Joe Shepard at Immersive Studios and Joe's engineer, Mike Yock. I've made 2 albums with them. The second one literally just arrived at my doorstep 2 days ago, and so it's not yet commercially available, although I have a few with me. But recording in using this technology has so astounded my listening audience. Even my listeners who don't know what they're hearing write to me and write about the recordings and say these are the most intimate recordings that they've heard. They feel like they are the guitar player. And I think that I made great records before I made these 2 records with DSD. They sounded, I'm not talking about my art here, I'm talking about the sound quality. They sounded great the step beyond that was experienced through DSD technology and has been just it almost defies words. People talk about it in ways that I never even imagined, and that's before they even talk about the music. And it's been such a great feeling to imagine my music going out into the world and people not only listening to it, but listening to it from the position of hearing it almost as if they are me playing the music. And it's been spectacular for that.
Oh, sorry.
Go, please.
So I was going to mention that the way we record, we were recording in the studio, is it's a typical old-style analog recording studio where we've got a 32-track DSD recording system, and we use it the way you used to use a tape machine, except we can edit and move things around, and we kind of went back to the basic tools of a good recorder, good production tool, an editor, but it's all in the DSD domain in an analog studio environment. And that's how Janet made her records.
I think that's the sort of unique thing about the recordings that I've made is there are no digital effects on any of my recordings. I play guitar, and I use a lot of handmade sounds and objects I affix to the strings or other parts of the guitar to make sounds not typically associated with the guitar. And the way that these sounds, which are more like tones, they have very broad spectrum. They're not specific pitches typically. They're sounds that have very, very deep low end and very high end happening all at the same time. This technology captures it in ways that was never possible before. And again, without use of any digital effects of any kind from the moment of playing until it hits the computer. The DSD has supported everything I've done in ways I could never imagine. I hear things from my recordings that I'd never imagined I'd be able to hear. Thank you.
Cookie?
Hello? Test. What's that? Little more. I think it is on. All right. Let's see how good a sound man you are. Test. 1, 2, 3. First thing I ask an intern to do when they come to the studio is count to 1,000 and don't stop. I don't know what it is. People get to about 3 and they think we're done. Anyway, it sounds good from here. Can everybody hear? Great. My name's Cookie Marenco from Blue Coast Records. How many of you are familiar with the label? Great. Whoa. Okay, great. So let's see. I started my commercial facility recording studio in 1982. By 2002, when I hit the 20-year mark, I was pretty frustrated with the sound and what was going on, and made a decision to take some time off and see what I wanted to do next. I had all this great gear. I loved recording to tape. I have a 2-inch tape machine. But Pro Tools and some of the digital recording, PCM recording methods were becoming more and more prominent, and I really didn't like the sound. And what it did to acoustic instruments, which was my specialty. And when you've heard your instrument coming through tape for 20 years, an instrument like a piano or cymbals on a drum or anything that's got a lot of sharp, high overtones where the transients are fast, and you go to PCM, it's just not right. Doesn't sound right anymore. And I got frustrated and depressed as an engineer and thinking I didn't really want to continue in this method. So I thought, well, what could I do? And I decided, well, my favorite parts of recording was when the musicians showed up at the studio and were just sitting in a circle rehearsing, just listening to each other without headphones, no overdubs. Those were really the magic moments for me when I thought, why aren't I in record right now? And then I'd let them go and we'd do all the overdubs in the typical recording style. And that was fine. I knew how to do it and I was good at it, but it didn't really satisfy me. And I felt that there was a place where other people wanted a more live kind of recording. So I decided to invite my favorite musicians who at this point, had hired me to produce their records. So it wasn't a question of, oh yeah, we're just going to go do this because we get a free recording. It was people that I knew could play all day long, were great musicians and talented. We went to a studio called The Site, and we had also made a decision to experiment with surround sound and some a particular recording technique that evolved into what we called extended sound environment, ESE. And when we were at these sessions, because Gus was also very involved in surround, and we knew Gus, Gus came out, and we were thrilled, and he brought the Sonoma system with him. So we simultaneously recorded to tape and also to DSD on the Sonoma. And after about 2 or 3 days of testing out all these techniques, the music that was being captured was so extraordinary that Gus said, I hope you're going to make an album out of this. And I thought, yeah, okay, we're going to make a label.
That's right. That was the start of the label. Right?
That was the start. We didn't have a name yet. In fact, I didn't have Blue Coast didn't come about for a few years later. We had already had the record mixed and mastered, and Mix Magazine came to some of the mix sessions and were so thrilled by it, they wanted to put out an article right away. So we had to make up a name, and we came up with Blue Coast Records. At that time, then we started releasing SACD. We made a decision not to release on CD. So it's got the CD later, it's got the 5.1, the first Blue Coast collection. That's what the Blue Coast collection is. It's those first recording sessions. Later, we started doing demonstrations at some of the audio shows, and Gus would come and we'd record to DSD, and we had developed a download system that many of you are familiar with. And at this point, I think HD Tracks came out in 2008 with 44.1 FLAC. We made our own hearing tests, and we weren't happy enough with that, so we released WAVE. So we knew we could release large files. The following year, we decided to release 9624, and it was in WAVE form, and it was so overwhelming, the response. The next show we did, Gus said, why don't you release in DSD? That's what you're recording to. And we thought, well, there's no devices out there. And so this was June 2010. And Gus said, well, the Sony PlayStation 3 has the ability. So we said, okay. We put up some DSD downloads from the show. People started downloading. Actually, Korg was the first purchase made of the DSD downloads through the internet during that summer. And we just never looked back. At that point, Korg got involved and said, what can we do to help? And we said, make AudioGate free. Well, actually, Gus suggested that too. I said, Gus, they came to me, what do I say? And he said, tell them to make AudioGate free. So I did. And they did. And in a secret little room a few months later, they announced AudioGate would be free. Now, at this point in 2010, that allowed people to take the DSD and at least convert it to a format that they could use and play back, knowing that someday they were really going to be able to listen to native DSD. Because really up to this point, I think what I wasn't really aware of was things like SACD players and all the other players out there were actually converting to PCM on the output. So we never really were listening to DSD. So now we had the ability to convert to some format. I remember Andreas called up and he said, Cookie, I'm going to playback design. We're going to have a native DSD player. Sure, it was $13,000, but oh well, he sold a lot of them. And then a few months later, 2011, Mytek came out with an affordable DAC, which was, I think it was called the 192. It was about $1,600. Just went through the roof. And now today, I think Brian can probably tell even better, but I think there's more than 400 DACs, almost 400 DACs since 2010 available that will play native DSD. That's amazing. And this movement wasn't started by a large company. It was started by us, David, and the few people you already know about. And that is amazing. And because of you wanted it. Really, if it wasn't for the fans wanting it and continuing to buy it, and Ray being so supportive, also doing his work in DSD, yeah, Ray. Well, you'll have your story, but I mean, it's really amazing to me, the movement that's gone on. So I can't tell you a number right now, but I know we've had more than 57,000 people sign up for downloads. So that's just amazing. So that's where we are now. Blue Coast Records still does the live recording, but what we did was we expanded. We got, soon afterwards, the labels more interested. Ray approached us about releasing some of his music. Fiona came to us. She had Gus mastering her music. Would you want it? Janet, too?
Yeah.
Janet, we release on Downloads Now. We make these pretty little micro stores I'm very proud of. And we're working on making our own store improvements, which we're excited about. And that led to my involvement with Fiona. And we decided to do a Blue Coast recording, which is solo piano, beautiful record that we have around, along with all of her other great recordings that she has. So that pretty much brings you up to date. I'm going to pass it to Fiona.
It's okay. Yeah. Small height adjustment. Can you hear me okay? It's not going to sit there. That's good. It's going to stay. Hi. My name's Fiona Joy, and I'm from Australia. You can probably guess from the accent. I sort of ascribe to that whole Wyndham Hill thing of there is no integrity greater than the intention of a single note. And for me to be able to put my journey, my feelings, my emotion into the music and hear it back is the most important thing. Clearly that's not going to happen with MP3 and with the way that a lot of people are listening to music now. So recording with Cookie and recording to DSD and SACD has been amazing. It's an amazing way to listen back to my music. And it means that I can play from the top to the bottom of the piano and everything comes out exactly how I want it to come out, because it's that emotional intention that you put into the music that you want people to be able to hear back. So, and I've also worked with Gus. Gus authored my first 3 SACDs, and that was before I went to Cookie and recorded with Blue Coast Records to DSD. So I guess I'll wait for some questions maybe. If there's anything else you want to hear.
Well, I have some questions of the audience. Is anyone familiar with a fellow named David Finkel? No. How about Harvey D'Souza? Okay, so I'll just weave that into the story. The hi-fi industry, I believe, if you don't have enough adult supervision and you're a little bit crazy, no matter what you're doing, you will eventually want to make your own recordings, build your own speakers, and build a pipe organ. And I'm pretty much all there with all of that. And so with the recording part of it, I was stage manager at Weber State University in my early 20s. And so when I had this idea for this new ISO-mic recording thing, I went back up there, and I hadn't been on campus for more than 10 years, and said, hey, do you mind if we hang something in front of you that's going to be really visually obtrusive just to see what happens? And they said yes. And now the guns are going to come into it, because Ogden is also the home of Browning Arms. And Valet Browning was a tremendous patron of the arts, and he gave the university a fortune to be used only for arts. And so his foundation, the money that was given to the school, was bringing in people like the Bolshoi Ballet, Vienna Boys Choir. So really world-class things were showing up in Ogden, Utah with cheap tickets. And so it was about that time that we had been recording some of the school people, and we had gone from a little PCM recorder, and then we went to the Tascam had a tape-based DSD machine, and so we bought first one and then two and then eventually 5 of those. And then we went to Gen X. Yes, we're a little bit masochistic. I've got a whole pile of that stuff, but we made it work, and we actually made some changes in the entire wiring harnesses that made them stable. And then along the way, we bumped into Gus, and our life was better after that. And then after that, we bumped into Merging Technologies Pyramix, and we were the first and only adopters of that technology in the entire state. So we had the only DSD capability, and we had a lot of it. We had several Korgs, we had all this stuff. But anyway, so you know, I'm dumb and I don't know all these things, and the lady that was running the Browning Foundation is a rather proper person. And while I knew her very well, I didn't realize the sensibilities. And so I had said, you know, if this musical group is coming, maybe I could record one of their rehearsals. And her attitude was, not a chance. Well, the musical group was the Emerson String Quartet. You know those guys, right? David Finkel plays the cello, and he is an audiophile geek gear guy from way back. And so imagine her surprise and I had never met him. So imagine this lady's surprise when one of the first things he asked was, do you know the company Kimber Kable? I would like to visit them. I'm an audio nut. And it was quite a while before she believed me that I hadn't set that up, but I really hadn't. And so we had it all set up in the main auditorium, and so he came out to the shop and we visited and talked and demoed and stuff like that, and he said, I can't really do the rehearsal because we're really not going to rehearse, but there is this string quartet in Logan who are funded out of the what's the big music center in New York? Not Kennedy Center, the other one, Lincoln Center. And they are really, really good, Fry Street Quartet, and they're going to attend the concert tonight, and I'm going to tell them that they should record with you. I'm convinced. Well, their attitude was, whoa, we record in New York, and what are we going to do in Ogden? But because David said, do you really have to do this? We recorded, they were convinced, and we've produced several discs for them. As a little aside, the violin, Rebecca McFall, her uncle is Tom McFall, who you've never heard of, but he's made a fortune, and you have certainly listened to his music. Meow, 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 meow. So anyway, but he's also a serious composer also. But so we got that connection, we got going with that, and then because the Brownings were bringing in some really high performance people, I happened to mention in passing at a show to a friend of ours who's also our distributor in India that the Academy of St. Martin in the Fields chamber ensemble was going to come. That's the 8 principals. And he said, oh, I'm a friend with Harvey D'Souza. I will call him and tell him that he needs to record with you. And I said, no, please don't do that. But as it turned, and the lady absolutely threw a fit over that one. But as it turns out, Ogden was the first stop on their tour, and so they had several days of rehearsal, and my friend in India called Harvey, and so Harvey got a hold of me, and they were kind of interested, tolerant, I guess would be the word. They said, yeah, if you want to record their rehearsals, that's fine. So we did, and then several of them went back out to Kimber Kable to listen to playback. And I can best describe their reaction as the same reaction that a fish has when you pull it in the boat and turn it on the bottom of the boat. They were absolutely astonished. They said, you're getting musically, emotionally what we want to do with no setup, virtually no level checks. You're just getting it. So they did come back, and we did more recordings with them when they came back in, but that was the start of a long career, and we went rapidly from low bit rate PCM to DSD. And I'm going to have to give some props to Gus and to Merging Technologies, and also Graham Brown of Zen Mastering up in Vancouver. We were searching around for somebody who could sort out these differences, and somebody kept saying his name, that he was familiar with all of the formats, and he said, well, if cost is no object, you remember the no adult supervision part on my part, and so I said, no, let's just go for it. And so we ended up from the get-go doing DSD. And maybe Fanya Lin will make it. She's here. We've recorded a couple of projects with her. She's preparing for her concert tonight at 7 in the Evergreen Room, so she may come in. So we've gotten some really interesting performance, but I believe in it. We can obviously afford anything. Well, we can afford anything except compressors and limiters, and we don't use those. But it's been one heck of a ride, and thank you to DSD. And one more little prop to somebody else, and that's Sony Corporation for never losing that little spark of the soul of hi-fi, because without them, I think that DSD and perhaps the ultra high-end technology might not be where it's at today. So thank you to Sony too.
Thanks very much, Ray. I'll explain a little bit about how we are looking to make a rather unusual seminar flow, because this is unusual. I need to let you know. We're going to be doing some Q&A with the audience, and it's a Q&A that I'd like to encourage you as much as possible to concentrate on the whole creative process itself. Somehow or the other, there's a connection between what's going on in the hearts of those who compose and perform. And as a photographer myself, I have a pretty deep experience of the struggle that you go through to take what you envision, what you feel, what's inside, what you see, what you hear, and turn that into something that's going to touch somebody else. I mean, that's the connection that all artists are looking to do. A lot of the times, audiophile seminars and discussions get rather deeply into technical issues. They really geek out. They nerd out on stuff. They argue about stuff, much of which is meaningless. Some of which is stupid. A good percentage of which is ignorant. We'll pass on all that. And instead, try to concentrate on what happens, what must happen for me to listen to a recording and get reduced to tears. To listen to a recording and to remember things. Like the Proustian moment when you bite into the Madeleine and all of a sudden memories come fluttering back. Because I'm convinced that the audio arts, the reason why they're so powerful, people wonder why audio is so important, our recordings and the rest. And what struck me a while back was that it's because it's the pool of our collective memories. We shared this, we grew up together. We're rare in the 20th and 21st century in that as audio as an art form began to emerge, it actually produced things that people shared. They didn't just share a song, they shared a recording of a song. They had heard a given artist perform that song. They had heard it on the radio. Over time, they would hear it on their turntables and so forth. And it's that pool of collective memory that's really, really important here. So you have memory and you have loss and you have heart and you have soul and collective experiences. All the rest of that are tied to our music. That's why when we sit down and somebody puts on a great recording, you go, oh yeah, I remember. Some of the things you remember, you probably shouldn't. Some of the things you remember, you wish you could forget. Some of the things you remember are things you're going to carry with you all the way through to the end. And so here's an opportunity for you to spend some time talking to artists and producers about what they do, that whole creative process, and why they're sitting here and saying that this particular format is doing something really important. Let's hear from you. Anyone have a question? Okay.
So we're talking about DSD, maybe MQA, ways of capturing and distributing audio. But I'm curious about, are there things that you're doing before you even get to that point in the studio? For instance, multi-tracking to me just kills music. You don't get the energy of a group playing together. There are probably some technical phase problems and things that can come up in those environments. Is there anything in the studio that you as artists and engineers are doing to get around that before it even gets to the point where you capture it in some format?
Yeah. And it's a really good question, and it's also a very confusing issue about the different, all the places it could go wrong. And you've mentioned a good one, which is multi-tracking. Now, multi-tracking can be, in our case, having 5 musicians stand in a circle, play live without headphones, and we set up microphones, each microphone going to a different channel. And each of those channels then needs to be positioned. So we can have anywhere from 8 to 16, 24 mics running live. That's one way to do it. And you're right, it does create some, well, our attitude is the music comes first. Let the musicians get in the position where we're going to capture them able to hear each other to get the right kind of passion and emotion necessary, the right dynamics that really move the music musically. And then it's my job afterwards to take all those 8 to 24 tracks and figure out all the phase issues when the musicians aren't in the room and they're out. And it takes 5-6 times longer than it does to record it because it can be problematic. When you're listening to the music come in, you just want to be moved and you want to get it as close as you can. But when you're trying to go for a final product that is going to go through several more stages to get to you, phase is a consideration. That's one kind of multi-tracking. Another kind of multi-tracking is where, well, this to me is old school, but drummer comes in, plays to a click track, you lay down the basic tracks, the bass player comes in on another day, you lay down the bass tracks, you lay down a keyboard track or a guitar track, then the singer comes in at the very end and tries to sing over the top. I have done so many of those sessions, I can't tell you. And the reason why I got tired of that method was, this is about the song. If it's about the song, it needs to be at the singer's pace and not what felt like a good groove by the drummer, the producer, the bass player. And I've been to a lot of those sessions too, where everybody, the musicians decide, wow, it would really sound so much better if it was just this much faster. And the singers just go along with it and say, yeah. But what happens is their breathing is out of line. Their breathing is out of sync. They can't get enough air. If it's too fast, they sing out of tune. The song's too slow, they can't hold a note, they sing out of tune. When you hear a good singer singing out of tune, the tempo was wrong, they couldn't hear themselves. It's a dead giveaway every time. And I've had people come in and say, so-and-so can't sing. And I'm thinking, they've just never put that person in the right situation and let them really sing. Once you let the singer lead the band, and in a way where everybody can really hear each other, you have very little intonation problems. Honestly, when you do those kind of basic sessions where you're doing overdubs, they're a lot easier to mix. They're easier to mix, but they don't move me as much. I know we all own those recordings. I know I own a lot of them. Some of my heroes as engineers made a lot of those recordings. And there are things you can do in the headphones to make sure your headphones are right, to get that illusion that they're really still playing together. Get rid of the click track. The 3 stages of click track. The first one is you can't play to a click track. The second stage is you figure it out and you will only play to a click track. And the third stage is you get rid of the click track because you know you can. Now, after that, you mix it down to 2 tracks. And it's in that 2-track mix where the decisions are made by the artist, the producer, and whoever. And then there's various stages afterwards that the sound can also get corrupted. We're going to talk a little bit more about that tomorrow. I have a panel at 1:30 where we're actually going to talk about those different stages and where everything goes wrong. And I've identified at least 6 places. There's a lot more, but there's at least 6 that can go wrong. And I wanted to mention that Keeley's and Cloud are going to be here a little later to do a performance. Hashimoto-san from Sony is here to record. We're going to do 2 songs direct to DSD. On the album I recorded with them, called Seminole Star, they brought in 5 musicians, stood in a circle, and they were really the first musicians that ever came in and said, we want to do it that way. It's not every musician that will want to record that way. It's actually the minority. Most musicians can get fixated on perfection. And perfection for me doesn't necessarily translate into passion. So it's a trade-off. Phase problems, passion.
Oh, and I was going to spring that surprise. Yeah, that was one of the things that are going to be different today is we're not just going to talk about art and the creative process. We're going to reach a certain point where we're going to clear a little bit of space and we're going to bring Keyless and Cloud in and they're going to actually perform. We were going to roll a Steinway in, but we couldn't get the Steinway down the steps for Fiona. I mean, it's going to be different because we want you to see how simple and direct things can be. That multi-tracking question, any of the rest of you want to?
I'd like to respond.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I've recorded in both those environments. There's no doubt that multi-tracking sanitizes the music, absolutely. You don't have the live energy that as a performer that you can sort of give the emotional integrity to the music. Completely different environments, completely different albums. Both have their place, but yeah, a huge difference. So yeah, quite a few albums in both.
So well, you got to look at this a couple of different ways. First of all, if you're going to have a studio and you're going to, you want to do any pop music, you're going to have a multi-track. And what we were doing a lot in Boulder in the studio with the DSD multi-track, we'd bring the whole band in, and they would play at the same time in a room that's live, and all that energy got captured very well on the multi-track without any phase problems other than where the mics are and that kind of thing. And, when you do that kind of thing, there's this energy. And with DSD, there's this kind of added believability so that when you hear it, it feels like it's real. Yeah. And that's one way to do it. Now, Janet's record was completely different. I mean, maybe you could go through a little bit about how you put that together, and don't leave out the wind and the door and sure. Here. Because here she used it as like an art medium.
Right. I was, again, so fortunate to be able to have a luxury of time and to have really incredible people to work with who made me far better than I am. So my first experience recording in DSD, my producer Joe Shepard and my engineer Mike Yock said, "Come in, we'll set up microphones for an afternoon and just get some sounds right." So I came in on a day where we weren't tracking, and I sat in the studio and I got familiar with being in there. I got comfortable with being in there and with these people sort of fussing around me. And what they did is they listened to me play and they set me up in the middle of 13 microphones in the space around me and 2 attached to my guitar. Before I made the first record I made with them, my entire career and reputation is as an instrumentalist. I had never sung. the fact that I ended up singing on that album was just completely kind of by accident. Nobody was prepared for it, myself included. But what they were really planning to record was my instrumental music. And so to sit in this field of microphones, literally surrounded by them, gave the recording that sense, like I had spoken of before, of being, you listening to it makes you feel like you are exactly where I am. They prepared me really uniquely for this experience because before we ever actually started capturing sound at all, I spent a lot of time in Gus's studio listening to music with Gus, and I listened to a lot of music with Joe and Mike. And we played like a lot of our favorite things for each other. So we listened to Tool, we listened to Pink Floyd, we listened to recordings so that we could sort of gain our favorite perspectives with each other and grow a certain kind of comfort. It was different than going into a studio and recording with an engineer who I don't know anything about. I don't know what their musical perspective is. I don't know what they like to hear or what they're listening for. And having that ability to do that was spectacular. As we worked through the first album, I had to go through a process of like having ideas that I would think of, like what would happen if we do this, and then sort of mustering my courage to tell Joe or Mike, I want to try this. What would happen if I do this? And one of the strangest things that we did is I said to Joe, I said I want to stand on up against a corner of your walls where the walls meet, and I want to run my hands over the fabric of your walls with the microphones because I want this sound of like air and ocean at the same time. And they looked at me, and I know Joe's first thought was, "You want to touch the walls?" Because they're beautiful, they're covered in fabric, like you don't really want to touch those walls. But he let me do it, and we recorded this sound that sounds exactly like I had headphones listening to this track behind me, and so you can hear a little bit of bleed of this guitar piece through this sound, and it actually sounds like you're on the water hearing this like a creaky boat, hearing some sound coming across the water. And this is all analog, and I never knew if it was going to work or not. It was just an idea. But they provided an environment for me where I could try these ideas. The next time out, there wasn't so much hesitation between having ideas and trying them. And so we were all so turned on all the time that when we were recording a composition of mine called She Sleeps with the Sky, Joe was walking between the tracking room and the control room, and the door has this kind of like vapor lock on it. He was closing the door, and he heard this weird sound in it. It was this like whooshing of the wind, and he said, I think, what does this sound like? So we ended up attaching microphones to the frame of the door. And we put Joe in front of this door with headphones on and the music playing through the headphones. And he literally played the wind rushing through the door on an autumn night where you could also hear the crickets outside. And this becomes a transitional part of this instrumental composition where there's wind blowing through. And it's so perfect. It's so perfectly aligned with the intention of the composition. And I had a relationship with my producer and my engineer where I could say, we could just do that. Yes, let's do that. One night they stood me out in front of the dumpster. It was 9 degrees outside. It was almost midnight, and I had to break some stuff. And they got a whole bunch of gear from the studio and scraped the corners of places where there was stuff that was hanging out, and they piled it all up in front of the dumpster, and they said, they ran out 2 microphones and stuck me under a pair of headphones, and they said, time for you to break some stuff. And I was out there. I don't know why that nobody called the police, But what we had was this relationship, and that's really what I'm talking about, is this relationship where they were totally willing to suggest things that I promised I would do anything they suggested, and they entertained my wildest notions. And it all happened to be recorded in this extraordinary format. That gave this recording such incredible depth and soul. I don't know how I could have ever experienced anything finer.
It's a very different way to use a multi-track.
Yes.
Yeah. Very.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, multi-tracking, interestingly enough, many of the most important recordings, what we call, classic reference recordings for us, are things that were done in this way, but it wasn't overdone. There's, you can do multi-tracking, and if you do it with creative integrity, with intelligence, and even with genius, it's amazing what the audio arts will do, because we're really interested. If you're interested in music and you're interested in recordings and you're interested in great albums and the like, you're interested in sound and the way sounds make you feel. And so I don't know anybody who wants to give up their Sgt. Pepper's album. Those guys, George Martin and that team, they were out there, they were pushing the envelope big time, hugely at that time. And the results, I think the results are immortal. I just wish they had multi-track DSD at the time. Ray, did you want to address that?
Yeah, I would just like to say that because my background isn't recording, I came from this from a lot different standpoint, because I didn't ever develop those recording art skills. I didn't have any skills to use, and so I went much farther the other way, and I think it has validity also. That is, one microphone to one track. I had done some experiments for musical theater stage, because they were having trouble with a flanging sound, and they attributed this to the wireless mics being used. And I wasn't thinking that was correct, and so I actually had the troupe put wired mics on them, and they had the same problem. It wasn't the wireless part that was causing the problem. It was the moving of the two microphones within each other. And so there had been something in sound reinforcement that 10 dB or 10 feet was enough isolation between microphones. And using sine waves, I believe that's true, but then there was still something we were hearing, and so I used the output of a Korg tuner, like you'd use to tune a guitar with, and that has a little bit of a complex waveform to it, and discovered that if I had two microphones set up and then had the Korg tuner playing through a speaker and looking at the scope when it was mixed back, I could null out a sine wave, so that if you were 10 feet or 10 dB, you could move one microphone a little bit mechanically and it wouldn't show up on the scope. On the complex waveform, it had to be more like 20 feet or 20 dB. And so that kind of made me think, are we hearing things down in that level? And so I tend to love huge, majestic music. Give me a giant choir, an orchestra, and a big pipe organ, and that's heaven. And those recordings never seemed emotionally satisfying to me. It was always that when it came up to a crescendo, things kind of mushed together. And it was about that time that the band professor invited me to a thing called drum corps, and I went and I was like, whoa, this is amazing. And so I went out to their little souvenir trailers and bought their CDs, and went home and listened to them. I was like, oh, this really sucks. And so I thought, well, we've got this isomic thing. I wonder if we could. And so we tried it on the field, and the first one was so horrible that we didn't even save the files. There was a technical issue that we hadn't anticipated. And so the second time, I put the word out to all of the drum corps that we would pay for their board and room in Ogden if they wanted to make a rest stop there and just record with us. And so the Seattle Cascades came, and we got a lot closer, so I could see, okay, now we can see what we're doing. And I didn't know anything about drum corps except that I liked it. And the executive director of the Cascades came to me at the end of the day, and he said, so this is a really serious operation you've got going on here, and you've obviously poured a ton of time and money and expertise into it. Why did you choose us? Because we're kind of like not a top-tier corps. I said, oh, that's easy. You're the only one that said yes. So we went on to that, and then I met Mark Arnold, the executive director of the Blue Knights out of Denver, And he came over and was really skeptical about the recording capability. But after we let him listen to some stuff, he said yes. And then that was the next time, and we had figured out enough of our mistakes that we nailed it. But it's that emotional connection. If I'm listening to something big and majestic or even small, I want to feel like I want to either laugh or cry or celebrate or mourn or something like that. And so I wanted to push that envelope in the same way that these guys are.
Are there other questions then that you might have? I mean, that's sort of boxing, multi-tracking from two completely different perspectives, but the point remains the same. Yes, sir.
How important are studio acoustics to what you do, as far as the sound you want? Does that play a role in how you set things up, or?
Oh, yeah. Every room sounds different. And my room is not the best sounding, which is also a challenge. And probably why I developed more of a close miking. But I having come from music that I like and I identify like ECM or Windham Hill or things like that, I like the combination of the close and the distant. It gives me a certain perspective. Everybody feels different. I like all kinds of music. That's just my style. When you go to some place like Grace Cathedral and you record, it's a challenge to find the right place to put the microphones. And for instance, Gus was at that session also. We recorded Emily Palin's solo violin. You've got this giant, incredibly spacious cathedral, and also on one side you've got cable cars going up and down the street and motorcycles. And you've got the bell going off every hour. But the challenge was finding the right spot. Where do you put the violin? You think it might be in the middle. It's not. It was actually, there was one spot much farther up. Yeah, I guess that's what it is. But anyway, it also had a much lower ceiling. So it wasn't as difficult to control all the reverberations and the sound going out. So sometimes a room that's too big is also a real difficult challenge. And it also happens acoustics in concert halls, which these guys can probably talk about. But every studio I've been in sounds different, and every studio has its own kind of sound. And I like that. I like that as a challenge. It makes the recording sound different. I have a fantasy about recording in caves, like taking the artist to caves or going to location recordings. Let's go around the world. Let's take the artist and maybe a group of audiophiles and make an adventure out of the recording. And you take, what you're given. If you've got cable cars running on one side and you got bells going off.
What about the guy who recorded in the echo chamber?
Oh, yeah, that's right, on Blue Coast. The song Romance, we were still testing where we were going to put people. We put him in the the echo chamber because he was playing flamenco style, and flamenco guitars actually, part of their music is interacting with the reverberation that comes back from the room. So that became part of his music. The room became part of the music.
Wasn't that like what happened with Paul Horn, the Taj Mahal stuff? Amazing.
Oh, yeah, right. And actually, we were fortunate enough to be the ones that were transferring the original files over to DSD. And you know what's interesting? If you get a chance, the Taj Mahal recordings that Paul Horn did, there's also a recording of the pyramids. And he recorded in all the different pyramids. And to hear the different room sounds is amazing. Like, even though technically they're not great, and the Taj Mahal is just really not a great technical recording, the sense of being there is overwhelming. And the thought that that little mosquito buzzing around 50 years ago is now dead, but it was so alive and seems so alive now. And then when you listen to the pyramids, the same flautist playing in these different rooms, you can actually hear the different sizes. And it's just kind of fascinating as somebody who, if you like sound, hearing all these different things. Anyway, I could talk forever about
Yeah.
the rooms. I love it.
Okay, Ray?
I'd just like to say something about the importance and the relevance of the acoustic. Because we were recording in the main auditorium at Weber State, it's roughly a 2,000-seat hall and has pretty darn good acoustics. And we didn't start out doing 4-channel. In fact, the first release of a group called T-5, a five-guy vocal band, was done in stereo. And a lot of people heard and loved this. And when we changed to 4-channel, we really regretted that we'd never had that in 4.0. But we thought, well, this is no problem because we have exactly the same hall, exactly the same mic location. We can just simply excite the room with an impulse, measure everything about that, plug that data back into a reverb program that will model that, and we can just add it. Not so easy, and in fact it sounded like reverb and it was pleasant, but we never could get it to sound like the room no matter how hard we tried. And so the acoustic space is really, really important. If it sounds great to your ear, you can probably get a good recording, although not guaranteed. If it doesn't, you're really going to have an uphill struggle, and the results might not be as good as you had hoped for.
Hey, Fiona, for you, I have a question. As an artist, what does the room acoustic? I mean, there you are, you're sitting at your piano.
Yeah,
What does that do for you?
As a touring artist, I play the same material in people's lounge rooms through to 1,200-seat concert hall. Deal with it all the time, and you're playing exactly the same thing, and it sounds completely and totally different each time. And there's often not a lot you can do about that except, understand. Yes, sometimes you can make a few variations to how you play to try and sort of counteract those issues. Sometimes I'll even change my set list depending on the piano, the room, what is working, what isn't working. But yeah, massive, massive difference.
That's
one more.
Yeah, go ahead, Ray.
Yeah, one more thought about that. So in this hall, we wanted to have more reverb, and of course it's full of nearly 2,000 seats. And so we purchased enough pieces of foam core like you'd mount a picture to, roughly 20 by 24 inches, nearly 2,000 of them, and we wanted it in black with the black foam in the middle of it so that it would disappear in the balconies and such. Really astonishingly beneficial difference in that. And the people who sold the foam core and cut us from it in Salt Lake said, well, if it doesn't work, what are you going to do with it? And I said, your market for anything less than that size in Ogden will disappear for years. But then more to that, they just got through this last summer removing all of the seats to put new seats in. And so we got a chance to do a recording of both a brass quintet and a single talented snare drummer in that space. So 2 entirely different musical things. And the our time got out to around 7 or 8 seconds with all the seats out. So talk about an acoustical difference. And I just wish that we could have had a choir in there for that. But the seats are back in now, new seats.
Anyone else want to comment about the connection between emotion, acoustics, and recording?
Well, I wanted to add to what Ray mentioned. Jack Vad is a friend of mine, engineer for the San Francisco Symphony. And when you reminded me about changing the seats, the way the symphony records is they record 3 or 4 nights with the audience. And then on the last night, the orchestra stays late and they do pickups, which means they play certain sections that maybe they didn't quite nail on any of the other 4 days. But the audience isn't there. And it's a completely different sound. And Jack has talked about it at length with me because you can hear it when he has to do so many odd manipulations to make it sound like one piece.
Yeah, just one little comment about that too. You remember the comment I made about pipe organs. There are some sets of pipes that only work if you have another pipe near it. And I was thinking about that, and so the choir instructor and I did some experiments where we had somebody sing and then somebody else merely stood near them without breathing and just held their mouth open. So and the difference was absolutely detectable. And so I think more than the absorption or reflection of the bodies in the audience would change it, I think it's all those little variable resonators that, because you're breathing in and out, and so you've got all these little tuned cavities of some kind out there. At least that's an idea of mine.
Well, that's an interesting observation. I can remember a cartoon from Positive Feedback many years ago which showed a couple of very prodigious gentlemen standing in the sweet spot, and the caption was "tub traps." But the idea here, though, the idea of resonators, presence, community, being together in a place. I mean, we're part of the place. The artists are part of the place. And that's one of the things I liked about the Windham Hill recordings when I first heard them, was that they were atmospheric.
Yeah.
They had a feel of place and space. And the Windham Hill LPs that I have, and I have a lot of them, really communicate that pretty well. The Windham Hill CDs that I picked up, expecting and hoping that they would do that, didn't do that. I mean, Cookie, was there any reason, from your standpoint, what happened with the CDs?
Well, you know, I was there during the transition from LP over to CD, and it really happened so fast. It was over 3 years that the CD came, and at the end of those 3 years, there was no more vinyl to be sold. And that was actually 88 through 90, 91. And the CD was introduced in 1982, so it took that long, and then suddenly, kaboom, it was done. There was no more LPs.
It was about 5 years that
Yeah.
the CD took off.
Yeah, and
They thought it would be 15, but it was 5.
yeah, it just, when it happened, it happened. A lot of reasons behind it, but one of the things that was going on from a mastering standpoint was, for some reason, there was a discussion about how much different the 44.1 master sounded than the LP. We didn't quite know enough. People were pretty fed up with all the clicks and pops and bad vinyl that they were getting. CD seemed like a better way out. So they actually started EQing a certain way to make the CD sound more like analog. And I listen back and I think, what were they thinking, really? I mean, it wasn't even
And
the same.
The converters at that time weren't great.
The converters were crummy. The only thing good about that period of time was the Loudness Wars hadn't come in. So 10 years later, what happened was, once CD had been adopted, then we ended up with a lot of people feeling that a louder record was better. So then we ended up with compression on the outputs, and you end up with loud CDs because, interestingly enough, actually PCM has a threshold on the top that's going to distort before DSD will, which is something else, a whole other subject Gus could probably talk about. But anyway, so we ended up cutting off all the top, flat topping everything, making it louder, and it keeps getting louder. And I think a lot of you are familiar with the different volume levels coming out. But yeah, it's kind of scary. I can't listen to a CD made by certain people when it's that loud. It just doesn't sound right to me. So you'll notice if you get a Blue Coast CD, because we do make CDs, you'll have to turn it up. Sorry. You have a volume knob, use it.
Is there a website that explains it called Turn Me Up or Turn
Yeah,
It
there's
Up?
something like
Pump
that.
up the volume?
What's that? No, it's called Turn It Up or Turn Me Up.com or .org, and it has a really good discussion, really good technical discussion, and really good examples of why rampant compression / limiting is not a good idea.
The connection that I'd like to draw here, and I think, and it's one that I really hope that it helps you a lot, is that formats do make a difference. doing things right makes a difference. You can't just do anything you want and come out with great art or anything that should be out there. Right now, when we talk about the Loudness Wars, for me it's just this constantly rising noise floor. The noise floor gets higher and higher, and everybody tries to deal with that by cranking it up even higher and higher and higher. And you get to a point where the only way you can do that is you have to compress and compress and compress, which means that, I tell you, I got to personally confess, I got a deep affection for the Foo Fighters, okay? But it breaks my heart and my ears every time I listen to their recordings. I mean, the live sessions are a whole lot better than the recordings, because not only is it multi-track to the max, I mean, click track and everything, brilliantly done, but that's how they do it. But it is so pushed, compressed, so high up there that when you listen to it, it sounds like mud. You know, Sonic Highway, when I picked up Sonic Highway, I saw the Blu-ray, man, this is going to be great. I picked up the LP. I want the LP. I put on the LP and ended up saying, shit. There's no other way to put it. It sounds like muddy, mucky stuff. It sounded better on watching it on HBO than it sounded when I was running it on a world-class turntable. That's discouraging. See, it's really important that we make these connections and that we have the discussion about artists, creativity, making emotional connections, and what the heck we're putting it out on. The formats make a difference. The way we do things makes a difference. If we think that we can get away with being sad, poor, and mediocre and fixing it in the mix and looping things, because I can only play something good for 10 seconds, so I need a loop here. Give me a lot of loops. Then we're sunk. You and I love audio. We love the audio arts. We love music. But this trend, this tendency is going to destroy it. Yes?
Yeah, I was going to mention, we were talking about studio acoustics and stuff. I was going to tell you about a program that we were doing in the Boulder studio. Joe and Mike came up with this method to bring in indie artists. We would put up a 5-microphone tree. Those microphones don't go through the console. They end up going right to the speaker. And you bring the band in. They play live. There's no overdubs. Basically, it's just one take. And if it's good, it's not good. If it's good, it's good. If it's not, you do it again. And it turned out, and of course there's no compression whatsoever. Whatever's coming through that microphone is going to the speaker. So in a surround system, you would have one microphone per speaker. And what we ended up with, we were recording these indie artists coming in and setting up in the studio, and it's just an intimate, beautiful, and just emotionally connective way to just hear performers play. So we started doing that and shooting video at the same time, and then when you see the video, when you hear that sound, it's just like it's a new experience. Did you do one of those?
No. How come?
I don't know.
I think I didn't because there's only one of me.
Oh.
So it was a little hard for me to get around the
Good
tree.
point.
So I'm gonna be the bummer here and introduce a topic that I'm faced with constantly, which is that I teach at the University of Colorado, and it's my great pleasure to teach the history of rock and roll. It's like a dream job. I teach in both Boulder and Colorado Springs, and I've been doing this for a while, and it's fantastic. It's such a cool thing to be able to do, to introduce young people to the world that I grew up in, and to talk about the whole confluence of rock and roll, socially, politically, economically, culturally. It's really wonderful. One of the things I ask my students early on in the semester is what music have you bought recently? And okay, so you can probably imagine, many of you have kids or you know kids or you can imagine them. They're not really buying music. They're streaming it. They listen to Pandora and Spotify. They think that having a subscription to that is buying music. I have heard all kinds of comments. One of my students who came on the first day of class and didn't come afterwards said a terribly crass thing. He said, if you're paying for it, you're doing it wrong. And so not to really introduce despair into this conversation. However, I am with young people at the university level. They're that autonomous age where they have money to spend, right? And we can see that they're spending it. They're just not buying music. And I said to my students yesterday, you are violating the laws of nature by starving the thing that is feeding you. That cannot be sustained. And I'm trying to say this without judgment. I'm just pointing this out because I don't know if anybody's ever said this to you. And I said, all of the music that you're listening to, you are listening to because of my generation of peers and of people who have given you this legacy. And now you are partaking of it for free. And I'm not blaming them. I'm just saying we have to at some point address this. We have to address how are we looking at the younger generations and giving them something, like what are we giving them from this environment that they will grow up to want? Because right now, I think what we're faced with is that we have systems, we have audio systems that we used to buy a system because it served our hunger for the music. We bought the best system we could afford because it allowed us to hear the music in the best way possible. And now we have this plethora of playback systems, iPods, whatever brilliant devices, and we have a musical industry that is in service of the systems, of the devices, because they are so magnificent and brilliant and lovely, you know? And so without judgment, we are here. So what are we going to do about this? And how are we going to, I mean, maybe it's incumbent on all of us to sort of look beyond our beautiful worlds of people who love to listen like we do and say, well, what are we doing to create some kind of sustainability? Again, apologies for introducing despair to such a lovely environment.
And I have one comment on that. As I was listening to you, I was thinking it's exactly like getting an inheritance and living on the principle.
Yes. Right. Well, can I say something about that?
Absolutely, yes.
I am a strong believer. Well, we all know what DSD is. We know that it touches you. It connects emotionally like nothing else does. The mass public doesn't know this, and my belief is that once you start exposing young people to it, and we used to do this in the studio all the time. We'd bring in high school students, and they'd hear and say, "What is this?" You know, they never hear anything that's not digital. They go to a venue, it's all digital. The console's digital. The crossovers are digital. But when you sit down with something like this Walkman and listen to pure DSD recordings, there's just like this emotional connection, and if kids can realize that there's something they love, some music they love, they can hear it this way, maybe they will start paying for it. If you make sure that's the way they have to get it to hear it this way. So
well, that's how you convert people from being mass people to being people.
Yeah, well,
I mean, the problem is the mass.
I think it's not something for just audiophiles. I think it's for everybody. And you don't have to have great ears to understand it, because it's not the way it sounds, it's the way it feels. And anybody can take part in that.
Yeah, that's exactly why we have to record in better formats, so that the music sounds better. And also listening to musicians who can play in a single take. You know, I think the world is full of recordings that are just edited a million times and auto-tuned. So that's exactly why we need DSD. We've got to improve things.
Yeah, that's the emotional connection we're talking about, the directness, the immediacy. When you have that sense that I know what's going on in her heart because I can hear it in this recording. Yeah. I have had no person, and I have a lot of people through my listening room, a lot of them, and a lot of them are young. I got another group coming in very shortly that's going to get their heads completely realigned. But the thing that's so powerful is not a single one has listened to that and said, why would I want that? Everybody says, how do I get that? Some of them get angry. Why don't we have that? I mean, that's their reaction. The answer is because you got screwed.
Well, they don't know about it.
Yeah. They just need
That's
the
part of
connect.
the screwing.
Right.
They have no concept. There's no place where they can go to find it. They've got to find inspired people who are like us, weird, crazy people who realize there is some connection between excellence and the format that we communicate the excellence in. There's some connection between performance has got to be there. There is a definite role for multi-tracking. There's a definite role for creative layering of music. But if you're a hack, it's just fix it in the mix. I mean, the Beatles were inspired. George Martin was inspired. I mean, I challenge anybody to seriously debate that issue. But the people aren't getting it. Heck, when they started reissuing the CDs, when you got the CDs of the Beatles, I just curled up in the corner and died. It was awful. You know, they were so bad. And yet there is a whole generation that grew up on those now. There's a whole generation that grew up on those. That's all they know.
Yeah.
So, well, we're being nasty and stomping on any potential questions. Yes, sir.
So now the time is that we have a
Microphone.
now we need a total solution. We have 400 around DAC, right? We have a wonderful format, DSD. And also DSD, maybe now we can handle 48 tracks, emerging technology. But the missing part, total solution I talk about is cloud service. We need a streaming service worldwide. We have to push something like the kids, my kids, some kids not fortunate enough. There's no chance to understand the music. They're starting from the headphone, from MP3 something. The group of people have to push the service, become a total solution. Something like a Blue Coast, but need protection.
Right.
Cannot be free ripple from a PS3 or something like that. Worldwide need this. It is chance, I believe, this egg and chicken problem. If we become strong, the people is understand the DVD and 4K, 8K or something called is the AB compressor. PCM, DSD, DXD compressor. People say, wow, I cannot living back something like that.
There's maybe even a bigger problem than just the streaming. The streaming will be here. Sony and Korg have teamed up in a way, and it's going to be here very soon for DSD. It already exists. They've already streamed live broadcasts in double DSD. One of the problems is monetizing it. How do you monetize the streaming? Because it's one of the things that is taking down the industry and changing it. We have to find a new way to subsidize the artist creating music, because 0.00035 cents per stream, you can't live on $17 a year. So a new way to monetize, whether it's streaming or smaller circuits or sponsorship or endorsements in order to have those kind of things. But maybe even the bigger problem is the professional audio industry. And I hate to point the finger at my buddies, but when I go to a NAMM show, they don't even really know what DSD is. And they're maybe even afraid of high-resolution audio in general. And it's, I think with the support of the community, more and more are seeing that maybe it is something they need to look at. But it's a challenge getting well-recorded music.
Even recording 192K is a rarity.
Yeah. This has got to be the future of the music industry. How do we get it to the mass market? We've moved from an ownership model to an access model with no way to work out how to actually pay musicians. So So it's a very difficult question, but we do need to find a mass market. And I think probably the children, the kids, is where it starts, because they're the ones with money, they're the ones that are doing the wrong thing. So we've got to change things at that level.
Well, one thing about that's sure is that regardless of format, streaming has put one of the most serious challenges to the whole idea of a recording industry, of artists who communicate through recordings. It's devouring that possibility. Everything that grew up from the time that Bing Crosby decided to buy his first Ampex and, gee, we're going to start making recordings, borrow this wonderful German technology, is being devoured in a handful of years. What took decades to build is dying in front of our eyes. It will become immaterial because if you don't pay artists, then you're removing the incentive. They're better off going and touring and at least getting a reasonable percentage of ticket sales. They're better off selling it off the back of a truck at the end of the performance than they are going into the music biz. The music biz is killing them, and I think that's become a pretty universal chorus, hasn't it? Do you know any artists that aren't really upset about streaming? What's happening with services like Pandora and the like?
I read this morning in the news that Apple Music in China is less than $2 a month.
Yes.
Is that true?
$10 for one person. For family is $16. Maybe this is a way. And every people, instead of ripple something or steal something, they say is take time. Time is a value.
Mm-hmm.
And then this way, because China population is 10 times bigger. If we can challenge it, the Apple is offer DSD format at the same price, a little bit expensive, but we have to approach those cloud service. Apple, Alibaba is a group of person gathered together, we can win. Otherwise, without cloud service, majority of a variety of selection, we are limited. Only limited people know DSD, SACD. It is time there's no such physical media gone, SACD gone. It is time from download, not download. Download cannot protect the original file, DSD studio quality file. We think about our age from analog to digital, but digital is good. And then now we have a true something from studio quality can deliver to home. It's our dream. It is the time, the technology already there. Studio quality, only musician, player listen something. It is time give the original file to the person at home who can enjoy.
Well, and there has to be a transaction involved. That's the key. The artist is worthy of their hire. They're worthy. They've put their lives into. Anybody here hasn't put their life into this? When you put your life into something, and you really take a fork in the road that's not going to lead you to fantastic success. You don't make tons of money doing this. When we take that money away even, so that we're forcing artists to do it for the joy alone, while we, like pigs, slurp it up at the trough, and we do it in formats that are worse yet, ruining our sensibilities. They're killing our souls. That's what I object to. We have a whole, now coming up on 2 generations of people who have no musical sensibilities at all. They have no sense of history. They have no sense of magnificence. They have no sense of development, of performance. They have no idea of what it takes to master something. They don't have the attention span because when you start listening to poorly done stuff, your attention wanders. You just drift from thing to thing to thing to thing to thing, and you just click and click and click through. You'll never get through Mahler. Forget it. It's not going to happen. Yes, sir.
I have a
as long as it's delivered in a high-res form? Is there something about DSD that is more artistic for you? I guess maybe that's another way to answer ask the question.
Well, yeah, that's quite a technical question. For me, the main thing is that people can hear my music exactly the same way that I play it. So whatever that format is, really, for me, I don't want people to hear my music as MP3. That horrifies me. That a whole lost generation of kids will never get to experience music how it should be listened to, and I don't want my music compressed. I just want it exactly like I play it.
You ask a really good question, which I'm faced with now, having just finished a new project and wondering what comes next, and how and what my next work will look like and how it will sound and how I'll record it. I don't know if I can intelligently answer your question, because before I came to Immersive Studios, I didn't know anything. I was like anybody else. I didn't know anything about DSD, and I've had good teachers to explain this to me, and I'll agree with Fiona that what matters to me is that my listening audience hears what I played, and that happens to be in DSD, and there are other ways to download, and I have other downloads available, other high resolution downloads, and they're great. And I agree, as long as it's not MP3, as long as it's not a mere fraction of what I actually recorded. I don't know that I am as invested in what it is. However, I am super invested in DSD.
Because that's where it is right now. So yeah.
Is Dominic from Merging still here? No. Oh, he just left. Anyway, I was going to have him stand and recognize him, because there's and Gus, of course, there's very few sources for hardware that will record and then edit DSD. I mean, yes, you can do it in the Korg system, but multi-track stuff and in a really stuff. I mean, Merging is, I think they're carried on with a little passion. I know Gus is. And then I said it before, but there's the high-end DSD, high-resolution audio, has in fact used an evangelist, and we have him in our midst. You should stand up, and I'll talk about you for a minute. Yeah, you two back there, the Sony people. And so Sony, for being such a huge corporation, they have really gotten it, and so it's a long story, my relationship with them, but they have both pulled and pushed, and then when they've gotten bogged down in corporate machinations, some of their spirit and some of us saying, no, you can't let that die. Seriously, you can't do that. Why are you going to do that? Then they get motivated or get their spirit back again. And so it's largely because of Sony's intellectual property in pushing the DSD that we have gone from less than this many good decoders to around 400. It's been both the push and the facilitation on Sony's part. So thank you for such soul.
And thank you for this. I can't live without this anymore. You take it everywhere.
You know, I wanted to answer from a producer perspective on what Fiona and maybe Janet has to go through in making the decision on high resolution. Fiona works with another producer. Yeah, it hurts me deeply, but I
love them both.
Yeah, see, and I understand that, and and I work with other artists, and I love them all, and it's an interesting yet difficult relationship. And so, what an artist often gives up to the producer is the format and how they record. And it's because you have developed an intimate relationship with that producer who often feels a certain way, and the artist trusts them. So Fiona works with my former boss, Will Ackerman, who is an amazing producer. And he is very different than I am in the way he approaches it. And she comes out with stunning albums that I love. I wouldn't do it the same way. If she came to me with the same album, I would approach it differently. But it's her choice to work with a producer who wants to work that way. And I think probably less the artist actually makes that decision versus where they want to go. Achilles and Cloud, in the same position, recently recorded an album with Compass Records, a label I love. And they're in the back now, I think. Yeah. I haven't even heard it yet. But I know they recorded in a certain way and style based on the studio they were at and the people they were working with. And I know it wasn't DSD, and that's okay. It doesn't break my heart. What I choose to work with is tape and DSD. So that question often goes to the producer.
Can I speak to that? I have made several albums and worked on a bunch of other projects before I came to Immersive and made these last 2 DSD recordings. And I'll be recording again later this month with a quartet. I just have another quartet album that just came out, a different label, and they aren't DSD recordings. I will say that for my solo work, the work that has only my name on it, moving forward, after making the last 2 albums that I've made on DSD, I don't know how I would go back. I can't envision at this point in my life doing anything but going forward, because I don't think I even want to hear the result of anything that steps back from what I've already done. It's an interesting sort of dilemma. It might mean that, I'll work on other people's projects and do, other ensemble work recorded in other formats. But as a solo artist, I can't take a step back from where I've already been. I'd rather not record.
I was just thinking the same thing the other day. It's been like more than 15 years that I've been living with DSD now. First of all, I'm not even sure it's the DSD that's the thing. It could just be the sample rate. But I cannot go back anymore. It's painful. Once that becomes your standard, it's I feel the same way.
Are there new formats on the horizon? Like, are the DACs that we buy today going to be obsolete in 5 years, say?
I don't know.
That's a good question. The question was whether the DACs you buy now will be obsolete in 5 years. I think the likelihood is declining, because now you can buy DACs at a very reasonable price that will play quad DSD. They'll handle single, double, and quad DSD. You can buy a DAC, carry-along DAC, and I have friends who have them, believe me, for $189. i5 produces them. And they sound pretty good. I've listened to them. They're amazing. When you have that quality of source, if you do your electronics well, reasonably well, you don't have to be expensive. I think that most producers are still wrapping their heads around double and quad DSD in the first place. Single DSD is very well established, and it'll always be supported, I think. I think DSD has come too far into the industry to simply be ignored. Too many people have approached me with their DACs and told me that they only do PCM, and then have me say that I'm not interested. Take it away. I haven't reviewed a DAC that only did PCM in almost 3 years. I just won't do it. Why? Because I don't want to go back either. My life started changing in September of 1998. And it's good to see more and more people catch up with that huge aha moment I had when I heard the first true advance in audio in 40 years. That's how I characterize it. If you love music, if you love audio, you can't be indifferent to it. There are people who accuse me of being a haranguing busybody and a headache, and I gladly accept the term. The sound that you hear is my fist beating against your ear. It would be wrong for me to know something that was that much better and not share it. That's evil. Why would I want to do that? The culture and civilization's in trouble. You know, I don't care what people think about me. I do care that their lives be transformed by what these people are doing. That's what I care about, and you should too. And all the people you should talk to should do. I don't think you have to worry about it though, because I think that quad DSD, it's going to take us a while to get there even.
And I think it's much more important that that be used in professional production where you have lots
Yeah.
of tracks you're working with,
Yeah.
and you want to
Yeah.
push the noise further away from, you know, the
Right.
listening range. I think, you know, upping the sample rate of DSD for that kind of studio work is very important.
Right. I think that what you'll find, and I've talked about this before, I think you'll find that the sweet spot for DSD, as far as the consumer is concerned, is probably double. You get a really nice payoff at double without having to get too large a file. Now, if you want no holds barred, the best thing that you'll hear, it's quad. I'm absolutely categorical about that. Anybody who argues with that, about me with that, is not credible in my mind. As soon as they say stuff like that, I keep walking because I know they don't know what they're talking about. You can't experience that and tell me that we don't want that. But I think Gus is right. I think where we want it is, for example, if we had Michael Bishop here or Tom Moore from 5.4, used to be Telarc, they'd be telling you, we just record in quad DSD now. All their mastering's quad DSD. Then they can step it down and change the formats and so forth, but they know they have the best.
Yeah. I'd like to take a stab at answering that question for you. There's two things at work here. One is the higher sampling rate somehow technically useful in the professional background, and then the other one is it sonically superior? And so I think that we've been going through phases of, on both counts, yes, that's better, yes, that's better, yes, that's better. I think we're reaching a point where at least my attitude is, yeah, that's sufficient or that's enough. And so the ones you're buying now, if you buy one that will do at least double DSD, I don't see that being obsolete anytime soon. Maybe new generations will be cheaper or more compact or something like that, but I think we've reached a point where from a technical benefit basis, we've got enough, and from a sonic superiority standpoint, we have enough.
I would agree on that.
And
Ray.
just getting to DSD in the first place, it's
Yeah.
a big step
Yeah.
in the believability of what you hear.
Right.
So,
Single DSD
Right.
is really great. Now, as much as we might want to continue our discussion, we've got a couple of artists here that we're going to share with us, and we were going to attempt an interesting project of actually recording them in DSD while you watch, while they perform. A couple of songs. Cookie, you want to introduce them?
Yes. So coming up to the front is Keeley's and Cloud. That's Maria and Rory to us.
play your guitar.
And we recently did a project down in Newport Beach. Anybody go to the Newport Beach show?
Oh, yeah.
So we set up a room where Dave has graciously given us his Pyramix system, and we recorded live at the Hotel Irvine.
Room 50.
Room 50 something. And we will probably continue because the interesting thing about it was we did a multi-track recording. We had anywhere from 10 to 15 people sitting in the audience. And there was the room didn't sound so bad. Interestingly enough, we had people sit in just the right spot. We tested a few places before the musicians came in, found what we thought might be the sweet spot. But what was more interesting was the music and how it was performed. Having just enough of an audience in a very small, relaxed, intimate situation really created some what we felt were incredible performances. And those are actually available for download in DSD 256 and 128 and all the other formats you might want. But it's great. It's them live, and it's all those little nuances you hear talking to each other, talking to us. At one point, a cell phone goes off that happened to be just in tune, and it was Shaban from My Tech, by the way. He feels really bad, but we want him to do it again. But that's the kind of thing that happens in live and people listen for, or they don't notice until the 10th time they've heard it, and they go, wow, that's somebody's cell phone. I mean, that was proof there was really a live audience there. And they also did a great recording with us, like I mentioned before, where the two of them and three of their friends came in, got in a circle, we set up multiple microphones, recorded the tape, and then mixed it down to DSD. And what we're doing today is actually really what I think is great for musicians, and maybe goes along the lines of some of the things we might be able to do with streaming, or at least delivering what the musician is doing more frequently. So Sony was good enough to provide them with a PCM D100 that records in DSD. Why they call it PCM, we don't know, but it's a DSD recorder that they've been taking on the road with them.
It stands for PCM is dead.
PCM is dead. Thank you, David. And they've been recording their concerts. And I think all the artists will have CDs and discs and things available afterwards. One of the discs they have is actually a recording from a concert they did onto the PCM, onto the D100, I'm going to call it, live. And today we have Hashimoto-san, who flew out from Japan, Sony, and runs, I think is the head engineer. Yes? Yeah. And he's going to just flew out here to set up the mic or the device for recording. He did this last year also, and it was great. We made those downloads available. And these are the kind of things we do. I learned to become a comedian. So, a funny thing happened to me on the way. Tomorrow, we're going to play back these files over in the acoustic sounds room, just over this way a little bit, at noon. So if you want to come and hear the two songs, what we recorded, memorize what you're hearing today, we're not going to use any amplification, so it's going to sound very quiet. It'll be interesting for you to hear the difference when you hear it played back. Oh, great. So now they're going to play, this is what happens in the studio. Yep. First you play the loudest section. Hope you don't distort the device. You got a good level? Oh, this is a new song. I'm going to love it already, I can tell. Yeah, what's the first song? First song's Mississippi River. What's the second song?
Hero's Crown.
Hero's Crown. Okay. So I'm going to step out of the way, and when you're ready, go for it. Yeah, let her rip.
It's so easy to get loaded in New Orleans. things I shouldn't say, do the things I shouldn't do. I was walking crooked in the quarter, leaning on his shoulder. You are the apple of my heart, honey, I did stray. Mississippi River, I am not your child, I am not your girl, but I wish that you would take me in your arms and carry me away from New Orleans. I met a gypsy down in Jackson Square with two lonely eyes and lavender hair. She was holding a silver necklace out to passers-by. It was her grandmother's locket. She had it in her pocket all these years, but the baby in her arms was hungry, crying with a siren's tears. Mississippi River, I am not your child, I am not your girl, but I wish that you would take me in your arms, carry me away from New Orleans. I sat beside her as the night grew long. There on the cobblestone we sang this song, her for her baby and me for the loss of you. The southern wind is kissing me awake. I lay across the Mississippi bank, New Orleans holding up her paintbrush, vivid in the sky. Mississippi River, I am not your child, I am not your girl, but I wish that you would take me in your arms and carry me away. I wish that you would take me in your arms and carry me away. white, and red of the sky up ahead come calling my name. I swore that I knew about the words of the true and the pride of the game. So I bled in a war for the red, white, and blue under lightning and rain. Lightning and rain. I shot my brother down. He gave me a hero's crown. I wore it all the way down, 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 down. I drive through the night, yeah, I follow the light of trucks as they pass. Tall churches of white where they kneel for the fight, and long fields of grass. If I could be free with my hair in the wind, I'd ride back to you. But there's blood on my hands and there's thoughts in my head that I cannot undo. I shot my brother down. He gave me a hero's crown, and I wore it all the way down, 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 down. Wake under pressure, it rattles my chest. I'm afraid of the sound. Sit up on my bed with the memory of young bodies hitting the ground. Watch out, there's a fire in the sky. There's a chain round my heart as I realize I shot my